When the pediatrician placed the measuring tape around her infant's head and noted, "His head is a little small," Joanne De Simone knew that motherhood would not be as she had dreamt. After a devastating diagnosis, she was not prepared to raise a child with life-limiting malformation, and then her second child was diagnosed with autism. Her story is going to grip your heart as she shares how this struggle drove her to reconnect with the lessons she learned. Are you ready for this? As a modern dancer.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Joanne De Simone is a graduate of Hunter College with degrees in dance and special education. After dancing professionally, she dedicated her life to teaching children with disabilities and supporting families. So, Joanne, welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope, and please tell us your story.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here with you today, Carol. Yeah, like yourself, I've had many moments in my life that were life-changing, but when I think about motherhood, the moment that definitely defines it for me is when we took my son to his first pediatrician appointment. And, the doctor measured my son's head and said, his head's a little small. And then he looked at me and he said, but your head's a little small. So
Oh,
maybe it's fine. As a matter of fact, when he and my husband were leaving the exam room to go to the consultation room, I was alone dressing Benjamin, and the doctor said to my husband, I hope I didn't insult your wife
oh,
with my comment about her head size. And my husband, assured him, no, no, no. But what neither of them knew in that moment was I wasn't insulted, but I was terrified because I could feel in my
oh.
entire body that this was going to be an issue that was not going to go away. We went about our business and went back at when he was 2 months for another checkup, and the doctor measured his head again and said, yeah, why don't you go for a baseline neuro appointment? And we did, and everything at that point seemed okay. The neurologist wasn't concerned. Not much a 2-month-old does. So she said, come back in 2 more months. And in that span from 2 to 4 months old, I was just growing more and more anxious. I was a special educator, and I just could see he wasn't making any developmental gains.
Mm.
So I was growing more and more, you know, concerned and convinced that something was just not going to be good. So we went back for the 4-month checkup with the neurologist. And at that point, she was like, oh, yeah, he still has a startle reflex, and, he's very stiff. His muscles were very tight. And she started telling us, okay, let's do some blood work and let's get an EEG and let's do an MRI. And we started questioning her about all of these tests. And her way of explaining things was very odd. At that point, she said, the brain is like a cake. It might look good on the outside, but you don't know how it tastes until you cut it open and taste it. And that really threw us. It was a very confusing conversation to have at that stage. So then she said, and call for early intervention services. I really, froze and started questioning her more. Like, why call for services when we
Mhm.
haven't done any testing? And she's like, oh well, it won't hurt. And on the way out, my husband said, why are you so bent out of shape about this? And I told him from the one early intervention class that I had taken, getting my master's degree, I just had the impression that the earlier a child was diagnosed, the more severe the disability.
Hmm.
So I just was convinced like something catastrophic is happened here. So, we did all the testing. The MRI was a very traumatic experience because we went on like a Monday after a holiday weekend, and the orders weren't in place, and it took hours to get it done. And by that time, Ben, who'd been fasting because he was supposed to be sedated, was dehydrated, and they couldn't get a line in. So it was just,
Aw.
prick after prick. It was just like everything about this experience was hard. So we ended up just doing a CAT scan because we just couldn't get him to stay still in an MRI without sedation. And as traumatic as all that was, what was even more traumatic was when we got the results of the test, because the neurologist just left a message for us on a Friday afternoon on our answering machine saying there were several abnormalities, including enlarged ventricles and pachygyria, and basically like, and we'll talk. and
Oh, wow.
and I was like, what does any of this mean? And for the next 2 weeks, my husband and I just kept calling her and asking her questions, and she just wouldn't answer. And she was again like, oh, when Benjamin is older, if you show him an apple, will he be able to tell you it's an apple? I don't know. Just Benjamin is
Oh, my
Benjamin. Just love
goodness.
him. Yeah. And, like none of it made sense to us. And the more we pressed her, the more frustrated she got with us. And literally, the last thing she said to me was, I've spent an exorbitant amount of time with you on this. And I just, the switch in my brain flipped, and I stepped up as an advocate, and I just hung up and I collected all the reports, and I said to myself, lady, you're never seeing me again. That's it. And
Could I stop? I want to stop you for a
yeah.
second. And what do you think was her agenda? Why?
The reality is what Benjamin has, which is called lissencephaly, is rare. And this was back in 1999. And,
Okay.
I think it was even more rare then. And I honestly don't know if she'd ever seen a patient with lissencephaly. So I chalk it up to thinking she either didn't want to have the conversation or she didn't know how to have the conversation. I don't think she was informed enough. And
Hmm.
it was out of her comfort zone. And that's the best way for me to sort of
Okay. Okay.
justify the behavior. But I got all the reports from all of the tests and brought them to the pediatrician. And I just remember, he looked at the report, and it did say on the bottom, possibly subcategory of lissencephaly. And of course, I couldn't find anything anywhere on what that meant. And he said, I don't know what this is.
Hmm.
And I was just, all I could think was, how do you not know what this is, right? And he could see I was just
Right.
falling apart, right? So
Right.
he like took me into his office, sat me down, got me water, and he told me like, I'm going to make some calls and I'm going to find out, what this is. And it was a real eye-opening moment, even though, it wasn't resolved, and I couldn't feel really good in the moment at all, but I felt like it was very clear. He set the bar. When you don't know the answer, it's okay. Just be willing to partner with me.
Hmm.
So it just set a standard for me in how doctors should treat us as, opposite of what that neurologist
No
had been doing.
kidding.
So, you know, he, he gave us the name of a new neurologist, and we went, and it was in a big hospital in New York. And the doctor examined Benjamin, and he looked us, right in the face afterwards and said, well, he has cerebral palsy. And and I was like, wow, I mean, he's 5 months old. How do you know he has cerebral palsy? And when I'm still trying to digest that information, the
Right.
next thing he said was, he'll probably never walk or talk or use his hands, but more importantly, I don't know what his cognitive functioning will be. I mean, I really didn't hear anything after that.
Of course.
You know, the bottom fell out. And, it was everything we were looking for. We wanted someone to be straight with us. So I wasn't upset that he was so blunt, but there's no good way to get that, information. So it was tough. And, we didn't own a computer, we didn't have internet, and so it wasn't the kind of thing where we can just quickly get connected and figure things out. But we did have a friend who worked in computers, and we asked her to look it up. And she found a website for a parent support group. But their tagline was touched briefly for all eternity. And
Oh my
that was
goodness.
terrifying.
No kidding.
So, we quickly got a computer, got on the internet, I joined the group, and the information just, it didn't get better. It just kept getting more bleak, right? We found out that the average lifespan for a child with lissencephaly then was 2 years, and everything was complicated by things like, seizures that couldn't be controlled, and all kinds of orthopedic issues and feeding problems and respiratory issues. And we were just it was just a building of more doom. And certainly by the time Ben was 7 months old, he did start having seizures, and we couldn't get them under control. And so it was just more terrifying, right? We were convinced at one point there's no way he's going to make it to his first birthday, because he'd been a very happy baby and really social and laughing and smiling, and the seizures were depleting all of those skills. So it just wasn't him anymore. And we didn't know if that was ever going to resolve. Fortunately, we managed to, get him into the hospital. We tried some seizure meds and they weren't working. And then we back in the hospital, try some more. We put him on a really strong steroid medication that wasn't even it wasn't even readily available here in the US. We had to get it through like a special waiver program through another organization. So it was all very complicated. But we did see the seizures, slow down and then resolve for a time. So, we spent the first good like year and a half of Benjamin's life just in pure survival mode. I left work. We just everything was centered on trying to figure out how to keep this child alive, because we didn't really know what his potential would be.
Could
So,
I go? Can you hold that thought
yeah.
and just tell me what you were feeling at that time? How were you preparing yourself? Like, give me some emotion here of what you were
Mm.
going through, both you and your husband, and how, just whatever you want to share, but just, I know that my audience would be interested to knowing that because there are people who are listening who will have experienced something similar.
When you're basically thinking your child is not going to live, and I, always say like I was a planner. I was not somebody who was living in the moment, and I certainly didn't want to live in the moment when my son's having seizures. I mean, there's nothing worse than your child going through something that you
Mm.
are helpless to there's nothing you can do to help them. And Ben would have seizures that would come in waves, so he'd like widen his eyes and open his arms, and then he would like startle and then cry, and I could see like the waves
Oh,
building. And it I don't know what the words, it's the most gut wrenching thing. And then there's nothing but blame and guilt. And,
okay.
I did this to you.
Right,
My
right,
body did this to you. I tried to do everything right. And still like your life is just falling apart in front of me. And doctors don't know what to do. I mean, that's the reality too. Like this
right.
neurologist who had been in the field forever. He was a much older man. He'd seen this before. Right? He would say to us, "Well, here are your options. What do you want to do?" And that was not a position we were used to. You go to a doctor,
Right,
they tell
right,
you
right.
this is what you do, and this is so rare that it lands on you, the parent, the caregiver. And so every decision is is scary because you feel responsible, even though, it's easy for people to say, like, it's not your fault, or this,
Mhm.
but you don't believe it, right? I remember that I had, through early intervention, a counselor would come every week and she'd sit with me. And, I didn't feel like I could even tell her the things that I was feeling in the moment. And she would always say to me, life is a one day at a time event. And it makes so much sense. I get it, but I couldn't digest that. And I
Right,
couldn't
of
put that
course.
into action because all I could think about is he's not going to live. What, I'm going to get to the end of my life having buried my son. Like what, what, it was grief. It was grief in its purest form. I think I cried, I think every day for I
Mm.
don't know how long. And to give you a cue on how Ben was, like I cried and Ben would laugh at me. Like this is like he was just a joyous person from the beginning, right? Like it's just like, come on, mom, like,
Oh my
look at
word.
me, look at me. It's like it's okay,
Aw.
right? So it was it was a very bleak time until I think really the seizures got under control. And to be honest, we went to see a geneticist when he was about a year and a half. And, that doctor tried to, basically, we'd done a lot of genetic testing and they didn't find anything. He thought it was a blood flow issue with the placenta. So, oh, nothing you could do. But again, I'm still feeling guilty. But he did put in our mind that we had an option about how we wanted to treat Benjamin. Did we want to be very aggressive in medical care, or did we want to take a care, like a care and comfort approach? And from that, we sort of just decided that some things couldn't be decided ahead of time, that you needed to see, where your child was at. If Benjamin is Benjamin, then of course you will go ahead and treat him medically. But we did feel very clear that because we didn't know how short his time was, that we were only going to allow doctors and therapists and teachers to partner with us if they showed us that they were willing to partner with us and that they were going to have the same goal of quality of life. And it was a huge relief to get to that mentality, because if we had a doctor who was not looking at Benjamin as a whole person and treating him well, then I knew I was not going back to this person. It was easy
Right,
for
of
me. Like,
course.
okay. So we wanted to just surround Benjamin with, really good people. Really good people. And when he was 2, he started a center-based program. And then I found community, with more parents who were walking a similar path but didn't have the same diagnosis, but were just experiencing a lot of what I experienced. And I really came to appreciate how community, how important it is. And just seeing Benjamin sort of exist outside of our small bubble at home, because of course that's the other thing where you're thinking like, my child is never going to belong anywhere outside of our family. How is he going to exist in the world without us?
Of course.
And so it was it was a real relief. And so we had a nice reprieve for a while. He was seizure free for a little bit, and he had all these really wonderful teachers and therapists. And I had really great families, other moms, I would say. My husband was really more reluctant to sort of cue in to the support group that we had online, and meeting other families. He worked in film, and so he was often very busy and out of the house 18 hours a day. And so I think his survival mode was, he had to just, function and,
Mhm, mhm.
make a living and keep us afloat. And it wasn't that he ignored, the emotions and everything. It was just that his process was very, very different. And that took me a while to sort of appreciate and understand that, we could both be on the same page eventually, but we were both going to get there differently. And that I think
Okay.
there's always a strain on marriages, and especially when a child has a disability, there's always talk about how high the divorce rates are. And I sort of feel like, for me, it was realizing that I absolutely had to give John the space and the grace
Mhm.
that I also needed to remember to give myself, that we were going to have our own process and there was nothing wrong with that. And that, when we were ready to come together, we would come together. And we always did, because decisions had to be made. But it was important, just to just appreciate that he could do what he needed to do without me always trying to push him to take it on at the same pace that I did.
What incredible wisdom. No,
Hard
really,
learned.
really. Yes, but really very, very wise. And in circumstances, aside from this type of circumstance, I think all marriages could learn from that.
Mm,
That is
mm,
amazing wisdom to let that individual, whatever you happen to be going through in your marriage, work it out by themselves as well as you try to
yeah.
work at it together. So thank you for that. That just really, really touched me. So continue, please.
Yes. So, of course, we were questioning whether or not we should have any more children. And we struggled with that for a few years. And, we did as much testing as we possibly could. We just felt it, it wasn't fair, in a lot of ways to have another child that would have this same diagnosis. To see another child struggle was
Mm,
more than I thought I could bear. But I also just felt very strongly that I would have tremendous regret if I got to the end of my life having buried my only child. So, after, you know, doing everything we could do, we decided to go ahead and get pregnant again. And we did. And I had a second son, Sebastian, and Benjamin was just about 4 years old when we had Sebastian. We did a lot of testing prenatally, and, everyone was convinced that he did
mhm.
not have any type of, lissencephaly or anything related. So, of course, we were relieved. And, um, for the first year, everything was really blissful. Everything seemed
Aw,
right on track. And, life was good. I mean, Ben always had, medical things pop up, and that had its own challenges. But by the time Sebastian was about 1, we realized that he wasn't his language wasn't quite up to par. And he'd had, a few little words and they were dropping off. And now I had a niece who was on the autism spectrum, so this was something very much on our minds, but something I really
mhm.
did not want to entertain, the thought of having 2 children with disabilities. So, I was pushing it down for quite a while. And I think Sebastian was a little over a year and a half old. We were all in the car driving, and, John and I had discussed this several times. And this conversation this day got really heated. And, John just started calling Sebastian's name out, and Sebastian did not look at John at all.
Oh,
And, John just looked at me and said, "That's not normal." And I could no longer, put up this force field and
mhm,
of
mhm.
denial. I had to address it. And, you know, I just went into clinician mode. I just went into clinician mode. Okay, okay, this is just a language thing.
Mm.
I can deal with this. And I took a look at, the issues. And, I created like a picture board, a communication board, and taught Sebastian, how to use it. He never pointed at anything, and that was something that really, really worried me. So I taught him how to point to pictures, and I was trying to teach him that communication had a purpose. So, if he was calling out to us, well, actually, he didn't really call out to us. Like, he'd wake up in the morning and he would just sit quietly in his crib. So I would go to the door and knock on it, and I wouldn't open it until he vocalized anything. So
Oh,
I was trying to sort of, create goals. And what we do is in special education is task analyze. So we create large goals and then small goals that build up to them. So we did that, and we called for early intervention, but there was a delay in when they could do the assessments. So we hired a speech therapist in the meantime, and had him then evaluated. And the evaluation showed that he had a lot of delays. And yeah, it was a really low moment for me. And the struggle with Ben all along had been the medical challenges. And with Sebastian, the struggle from the very start was what was the right educational setting for him. He had lots of good strengths and then, lots of challenges. And those skills were really unbalanced. So it makes it hard to place a child properly. And so we struggled for a long time in terms of, okay, should we put him in an inclusive setting and hope that works? Should he be in a self-contained only special education class? And we just really couldn't figure it out. So, we took a look at different preschools, and we decided to go ahead and put him in like just a general education setting. In New York, where we were at the time, they had this wonderful program where they would assign a certified special education teacher to work with a student one on one in a general education setting. So we felt like it was the best of both worlds. And, that went really well the first year. He started talking in phrases and he was potty trained and like,
Hmm.
he was doing really well, like really quickly, like made all these gains. And then the following year in preschool, things got a little bit more difficult because the class size was larger, and of course, the academic skills they're trying to press so hard to get kids ready for kindergarten, and so there was some challenges there. But again, by the time kindergarten rolled around, there was we felt like he had made enough gains that a self-contained class was not going to be appropriate. So we put him in, an inclusive kindergarten class, and that fell apart very quickly. Like he
Oh
just,
my goodness.
the teachers weren't, able to manage him. He had, he, like a lot of kids on the spectrum, he would run away from time to time. They call that eloping. And, that was an issue. He once just ran out of the cafeteria and they couldn't find him. And that terrified me when I finally found out, because the doors aren't locked in public
Mhm.
school buildings. And the school was very close to a very busy highway. And so the potential danger was, tremendous, tremendous. So, we got to this point where, we hired a lawyer and we were suing the Board of Ed for private school placement. And I spent the year trying to find the right private school. And when we finally found one, the public schools, they dragged the process on so long that by the time they agreed to send them to private school, we lost the placement in the one
Oh,
school that we thought would work.
unbelievable.
It was just it was just the lowest point of my life, having struggled for 2 years with him
Mm.
in the educational settings and feeling like, you know, he doesn't belong anywhere. And then we went to a drugstore and ran into some neighbors, and we were talking to them for a while, and Sebastian was really just very hyperactive. He wasn't doing anything bad, but he was just moving a lot. And this one woman, was standing on the line checking out, but I felt like she was annoyed with us, but I never made eye contact with her.
Mhm.
And I thought, I'm, you know, I'm just imagining things. I always joke that, I assume that I'm always doing something wrong because I went, to Catholic school for 12 years. So I figured, it's just me. But I took Sebastian into the vestibule so that he could look at himself on the security television. And while we were there, the woman walked by and she like audibly huffed at us. And I said to her, "What is your problem?" And she turned around and said to me, "My dog is better trained. You should put him on a leash."
Oh, unreal. How did your heart handle that?
Oh, I mean, I did, try and yell something back at her, but I just it didn't land, and and I knew I couldn't like go after her because I had Sebastian, and so I was sort of stuck screaming at her in this vestibule. And I remember turning around to look for, my husband, and like the look on his face, like he and like the rest of the customers on the line were looking at me, and I was like, oh, they think I'm just having this unprompted like breakdown. they had not heard what she said to me. And in that very moment, I knew like we can't stay here anymore. We don't belong here. And I have to find a place where both my children are welcome in the community. And fortunately, I had friends who had moved away from Brooklyn and, were had found a nice community in New Jersey. And I came out and I took a look, and I was definitely convinced that it was going to be, the right move for us. And we did, and it was. So, there was light, and there was time for me to just completely digest what had happened at that point. I think it was, about 9.5 years of parenting in the most stressful of situations. I started to write, actually, mostly because I had been talking to college students who were studying to be special educators, and they kept begging me to write a book. And that was my first thought, was, okay, well, I think educators and providers need to understand the parent perspective, because there was a lot, that I realized immediately as a teacher. When I sat down on the parent side of the table, I realized how little I'd understood parents, because no degree can prepare you for the emotional aspect of parenting children with disabilities. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write this story, and I I started to work on that, and then I started to take some classes to learn how to be a better writer. And in this process, I started to write essays, and I wrote one essay for Brainchild magazine called "Bury My Son Before I Die." And
Mm.
in this essay, I talk about having a son who might die and doing everything I could to keep him alive, and being terrified about what happens to him if I die first. And the response absolutely floored me. I mean, I grew up in a family where it was okay to speak your mind and to share your emotions. And so I talked that way, I write that way. It didn't dawn on me to do anything any differently. But parents were writing to me and saying, that for the first time, yeah, this one mom wrote to me and said for the first time, she didn't feel like a monster for having all of these same thoughts. And I was really devastated by that, because I just thought, you're taking care of a medically fragile child, and you're guilting yourself for having a really normal response to a very stressful situation. And so I realized at that point that what I needed to do with the book was, one, to be really brutally honest, and two, to focus on the conflicts that I was experiencing, because I feel, very strongly that I have these conflicts that are just unresolvable. And that's okay. You can still live with those things. For me, the key was reaching back to my life before children, when I was a professional modern dancer. And I always had like little things about dance would creep into my mind, and I would think about them, but I wouldn't really realize that they applied to my life. And one of my first memoir teachers said, dance is the hook of your story. And so the more I delved into that and thought about it and wrote about it, the more I realized that the lessons I learned as a dancer were life lessons that I could use to manage conflict. And so, things like when that counselor would tell me when Benjamin was little that life was a one day at a time event, and I couldn't digest that information. Years later, thinking about dance, there was one thing my dance teacher used to say was, live in the movement. And he would stand in front of us and he would glide his hands across the air in front of him, and he would say, pretend that you're touching the surface of water. And it was just the perfect thing to say, to make us realize that we had to slow down and not think about the next movement and the next movement and the next movement. Because when you do that, you can't give full attention and appreciate the movement you're performing right now. And so thinking about these things through movement as a kinesthetic learner, it made so much sense to me all of a sudden. And so that's ultimately what I did. And so in the book, which is called Fall and Recovery, I in each chapter talk about a dance lesson, a dichotomy of special needs parenting, and how to use those lessons to deal with the conflict.
I'm going to stop you right there and we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I would like you to share more about that. So we'll be right back.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another. Gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
As Joanne De Simone has been sharing this morning about, I'm trying to think of the right word. I was going to say adventure. Because it certainly, listening to your story has, I know it touched many hearts as it has touched mine to see your tenacity, your strength through situations where a lot of people would not have been able to cope. And not only did you cope, but you are a fixer. You finding ways to fix the situation, and I applaud you for that. I don't see you in any pity parties, even though there probably were moments that you did experience that. And so I thank you for what you shared, and what an encouragement that would be for our listeners going through something like this, or anything regarding our children and what they possibly may be struggling with. So now in the second part, I would like you to share, um, as you started to, about regarding the dance and what it has taught you. And you quoted something here that I would like to repeat, which is, or, sorry, I'm quoting you. It's realizing that we live simultaneously in love and grief. That really touched me. In the end, dance teaches Joanne not only how to move freely through pain, but also how to fall and recover. So, continuing your story now, could you start from that point and share with us?
Sure. Yeah, simultaneously in love and grief. So I talk about that in the book in two contexts really. I talk about how when I was almost 9, my father died on the morning of my brother's wedding day,
Oh,
and
no, my
I
goodness. Wow.
so there was a moment where I was sitting in the church and watching my brother get married. And, I have this image of, him reciting his vows. And my mother was sitting next to me, sobbing. And this idea of this sobbing and this joyful marriage vows commingling in this cold, holy air in the church, was a real you know, aha moment looking back at it as an adult of that love and grief being married. And I experienced sort of that moment too in dance. When I was in college, I performed this dance called There Is a Time, which is based on Ecclesiastes 3, to everything there is a season. And after one of our run throughs, we were looking at a playback of video. And at the end of the dance, we're in a circle, and the women are supposed to have their dresses all looking the same, but because of the way we did the dance, some of us had the dresses configured differently. So it was like, oh, there was some people on the stage that had been dressed for a time of war, some were, time of peace. And looking at that too, I was like, well, this is life, right? It's everything. It's every
Wow.
experience that we have all in one visual. And so again, like full circle, it was making me think how these things are connected. And, part of this process was realizing that, there is so much. I think all parents have grief and regret. I mean, every human being does, right? But I think, like, for me, making these connections to everything, especially with dance, where I had some regret leaving it, but I knew it had to be done. But realizing that I could still use these lessons allowed me sort of to just, release the guilt and regret that I had when I realized that I could continue to learn from them. And one of the interesting things that I had learned, there was a specific technique in modern dance called the Jose Limon technique. And fall and recovery is a very big part of this technique. And I like to explain it by having you think about a swing, a playground swing, right? The swing falls and then it rises. And when it rises, it gets to a point of weightlessness before it drops again. In modern dance, gravity is used to create movement. You go down to go up. And it's sort of just allowing yourself to flip the script, like coming down is difficult. And you can look at it as gravity's dragging me down, or you can look at it as this is the momentum that's going to take me back up to a place of contentment and weightlessness. And so just allowing myself to channel it that way makes it, easier to deal
Hmm.
with struggles as they come. It's not that, you don't push it aside. I very much believe that being in the moment is not exclusive to when things are going well. You have to, accept that when you're down, you're down. And I think you have to ride that momentum and realize that you're going to rise again. And for me, because it's funny, I don't think I would normally say to people have hope, but to me that is a definition of hope. So just, sometimes words mean different things to different people, but how you translate things, it's okay. You can do it in a different way and still have the same outcome.
Could you share what some specific dance lessons are that you found particularly relevant to parenting children with disabilities? I just find this so amazing, what you are sharing regarding this, and also again the wisdom that you had to make that to draw that connection. So I really thank you for sharing what you have done. And now please share maybe some of these lessons and how they manifest your day-to-day life.
Sure. So a very simple one was my teacher would tell us to stand, and lift one leg because he would tell us to drop the weight. And, that didn't always make sense, but he would, make us hold up our legs limply and then just drop it. And, that seems simple enough. But I use that kind of idea, when I have a moment, if I'm spiraling, if I find myself saying things that I know are negative and I just don't have any place, to go in my head, I'll tell myself to drop that weight, drop that weight. So it's a very simple thing. Another lesson that I definitely think about a lot, um, I say in the book, is it's not about the height of the leg. So in modern dance, it's not how high you can lift your leg and how beautiful the pose is. It's about fulfilling a choreographer's intent and getting a message across to your audience. And in my life with Benjamin and dealing with medical decisions, oftentimes like when he was getting a feeding tube, right? It was so scary. Okay, now he's going to have, a hole in his stomach, and I'm going to have to deal with all this insurance issues, and I'm going to have supplies that I have to get, and I have to, train how to use all these things, and what is that going to mean for me? And when I pause to say, it's not about me, right? Me, the dancer, is supposed to disappear and just be the message. Me, the mom addressing medical needs, this scenario is not about my needs, it's about his needs. So it allows me to just, take a breath and say, it's not your job to put yourself in the spotlight here. Put Ben in the spotlight and take a good look at him and
Hmm.
make decisions based on what he actually needs. So again, it's just a shift in perspective.
Could you share your book now, please?
Sure. The book is called Fall in Recovery: Raising Children with Disabilities Through Lessons Learned in Dance. And what I really strive to do is to reach families who are, experiencing the things that I have and need to hear that they're not alone in it. And I really want to tell them to validate their feelings. I think there's a lot of struggle sometimes. We're told by society that it's bad to have a child with a disability and that it's bad to feel bad about it. So those are very conflicting messages. And so parents
Mm.
isolate. And I would like for parents to absolutely validate their feelings and their experiences, give themselves, as I said with my husband, the space and the grace, to
Mhm.
go ahead and manage all of those feelings and to find their community and to realize that, acceptance or maintaining hope, that is not a destination, that it's a fluid state of being. And it's okay, for it to be more like the swing. Just yesterday I spoke to someone who, the message was like it was life changing for them. I think, I've had other parents say even just hearing the title Fall in Recovery was a
Mhm.
relief to
Mhm.
them.
Oh my
Like
goodness. Wow.
like yes, that makes so much sense. So yeah, I'm just overjoyed, to know that, it lands where it needs to land, with the people who need to hear it. And I'm hoping that, providers, also get to see it and realize what parents aren't telling them. And,
Mm.
even people who aren't working directly with anyone with a disability, I think it's an important piece of work just because I think it's important for everyone in our culture to realize how ableism affects parents.
Impactful. Wow. Thank you. How are they doing now, your sons?
Oh, well,
Hmm.
they are. Benjamin is 26
Oh my.
and Sebastian is 22.
Where did the time go? Right?
I have no idea. They're full grown adults. I mean, Benjamin is very much, who he has always been. He's happy. He's just constantly joyful, but he is home full time because there aren't many medical day programs, and COVID really,
Oh, of course.
complicated
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
But he's very happy to be home and be in his own schedule and do the things that he likes to do. And Sebastian is in a non-degree inclusive college program out of state. He is also an Division III NCAA athlete. He runs cross country and
Oh
track.
my goodness.
And yeah,
Wow.
and loving every minute of it.
And
Yeah,
so
he's
is
on his
Mama.
own
So
journey.
is Mama, right?
Yeah, it's my biggest hope that all the lessons he learns as a runner translate for him and generalize to
Mm.
skills that he can use for life.
And what does he want to do?
He actually wants to be a paraprofessional, so he wants to work with children in the classroom who have disabilities as well. He wants to give back
Mm.
because he felt very
Yes.
supported, and so
Yes.
he would like to support other children. Yeah.
Awesome. So, in conclusion, is there anything that you would like to summarize or encourage or just to say to the audience?
Yeah. the thing I never say, I'll never tire of saying, validate your feelings, validate your feelings. And I strongly want to tell parents, don't allow other people to tell you how to love your children or how to grieve over them. It is your right to take that process.
Thank you. Thank you so much for what you shared today. Thank you for touching our hearts. I can't wait to share this with my audience and know that it is going to be impactful in many lives. And I know as a writer, you probably have said what other writers say, and that is, if I can reach one person.
Mm,
And I'm sure that you have reached many, and you certainly have touched my heart today. So I thank you for sharing your story on Never Ever Give Up Hope.
thank you.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.